The protagonist, Lee Holloway, narrates her experience as she leaves a mental health institution on her sister's wedding day. She reflects on the routine and simplicity of life inside the institution, where she had structured days with meals, classes, therapy, and a set bedtime. Despite the predictable routine, she expresses gratitude to Dr. Twarden and acknowledges the simplicity of life inside the institution. However, as she bids farewell, there's a reluctance to leave, and she is wished a bon voyage. Upon returning home, she is greeted by family members, including her father, who gives her a warm welcome. Despite the joyous occasion of her sister's wedding, tension arises between Lee and a character named Peter. The interaction reveals some underlying issues, and Lee's discomfort is evident. However, the atmosphere becomes strained when Lee's behavior changes, and she states that she doesn't feel well. This leads to a heated argument between Lee and another character, where accusations and frustrations are expressed. The movie then shifts to a scene where Lee is undergoing a typing test for a job interview as a secretary. The interviewer notes her exceptional typing skills and overqualification for the position. Despite the mundane nature of the job, Lee expresses a desire for the role. The interviewer, observing Lee's closed and tight demeanor, decides to hire her as a typist. The narrative ends with an observation about Lee's reserved nature, hinting at a deeper complexity within her character. In the next scene, the focus returns to Lee, now in her role as a secretary. As she receives a task from Mr. Gray to type, Lee acknowledges the request. In a brief encounter with another employee, Lee is questioned about her role as the new secretary. The exchange is concise, with Lee confirming her position. The scene then transitions to a moment where Mr. Gray provides further instructions to Lee, asking her to freshen up traps and handle additional paperwork. Throughout the process, Mr. Gray monitors and guides Lee's actions, emphasizing meticulous attention to detail. A brief interruption occurs when someone enters the office looking for Mr. Gray, prompting Lee to attend to the visitor's needs while Mr. Gray temporarily steps away. In this scene, Lee engages in a phone conversation with her father, who is downtown somewhere. She momentarily puts him on hold to attend to another call from Miss O'Connor. During this conversation, Lee is instructed to relay a message to Mr. Gray about signing a settlement. As the scene unfolds, Lee's father reconnects. Unable to speak to her dad, who seemed upset and distressed, make Lee frustrated. She now goes back to fighting her pain with pain. Taking utensils out from her purse, she tries to cut herself to ease the pain, only to find out that Mr. Gray is looking at her with shock. Perplexed and embarrassed, Lee quickly packs her self-inflicting pain utensils. The story then shifts to a different setting where Peter and Lee engage in a casual conversation about washing clothes. As the dialogue progresses, Lee candidly shares details about her past nervous breakdown, and Peter discloses the similar experience. The scene transitions to a more formal setting where Mr. Gray confronts Lee about typing errors in a letter. He expresses frustration at the perceived lack of attention to detail and professionalism in her work. The scene concludes with Lee acknowledging her mistake and the need to redo the letter. The atmosphere becomes tense as Mr. Gray highlights the gravity of the situation, indicating that such errors cannot be tolerated, especially considering the potential impact on his professional image. In this scene, Mr. Gray instructs Lee to type a bill for $500. As she begins her task, Mr. Gray notices and addresses several issues with Lee's appearance and behavior. He points out that she needs to proofread the letter she typed and criticizes her dress, instructing her to either wear a hairnet or stop playing with her hair. Lee, apologetic and seemingly unaware of some of these habits, responds to Mr. Gray's feedback. Later, the narrative shifts to a different setting where Lee is at Peter's house. Sylvia, Peter's mother, offers Lee homemade wine, but she declines. Peter's family engages in casual conversation, with Sylvia mentioning that Peter talks about Lee frequently and considers her his soulmate. There's discussion about Peter's stable job at JCPenney and the possibility of a double wedding in the family. In this scene, Mr. Gray addresses Lee's performance at work. He questions her ability to answer phones effectively and comments on her apparent lack of sleep. Mr. Gray acknowledges that he is not running a mortuary and encourages Lee to show more enthusiasm when answering the phone. The narrative then shifts to a more personal conversation between Mr. Gray and Lee. Mr. Gray becomes more concerned when he notices the sewing kit and band-aids, prompting him to question why Lee engages in self-harm. Lee admits to feeling shy, and Mr. Gray offers her hot chocolate, attempting to create a comforting environment. The conversation takes a deeper turn as Mr. Gray delves into the psychological aspect of self-harm. Expressing a level of authority and concern, Mr. Gray makes a firm declaration that Lee will never cut herself again. He emphasizes that this behavior is in the past and instructs Lee to leave work early, encouraging her to take a refreshing walk home for relief. As she takes a shortcut through Hawkins Park, she reflects on the experience, realizing that she may have never walked alone before. Despite being physically alone, she feels a sense of connection and guidance from Mr. Gray. The following day, Lee, influenced by her newfound sense of permission, but makes another typing mistake. Mr. Gray expresses frustration at her continued errors, questioning her ability to perform simple tasks such as typing and answering phones. Mr. Gray's dissatisfaction escalates, and he instructs Lee to bring a letter into his office. Once there, he directs her to place the letter on his desk, bend over so she can look directly at it, and read it aloud. The scene ends with Lee perplexed by Mr. Gray's instructions and the nature of the task he has assigned her by spanking her bummies till they're blue. In this scene, Mr. Gray guides Lee through the process of reading a letter aloud, offering constructive feedback with spanks. He requests her to repeat the letter's content and then instructs her to type it again. Lee complies, acknowledging the typo in the initial draft. Lee, completely overwhelmed, wondering what has happened, is taken aback, although a sense of excitement overcomes her, walks away, only to find her bum blue and black. Later, Lee is seen at home with her mother. Her mother removes the lock from a cabinet, symbolizing a level of trust or responsibility. The scene then transitions into Lee and Mr. Gray having a strange affair where one complies to the other. They do weird things in the office that could turn a blind man to see. So much so that Mr. Gray has her on a leash where Lee has to get Mr. Gray's approval to what she eats. Lee is then tasked with replacing the light bulb in the hallway to Mr. Gray's office. The scene transitions to Mr. Gray meeting with Mr. Garvey, accompanied by Lee. Mr. Gray introduces Lee as his secretary and expresses regret about a previous typo. In this scene, Lee is at Mr. Gray's office, where he instructs her to work on some papers. Despite expressing her intention to leave, Mr. Gray advises her to give him a week to provide the requested information. Lee then offers to return later for more typing work, to which Mr. Gray thanks her and bids her good night. Later, Lee friend discusses her boss's inappropriate behavior with a friend. The friend suggests suing him for sexual harassment, and Lee entertains the idea, stating that her lawyer is the best. The narrative shifts to Lee and family, finding out that her father has checked himself into the hospital for a drinking problem. Following this, Lee wants to see Mr. Gray for some help to recover from her sad state. She approaches him, expressing her need for his attention. However, her words remain unspoken, and she redirects the conversation to work-related matters, asking about the Lynch papers. The narration then delves into Lee's reflections on her relationship with Mr. Gray. After being turned away from his house, Mr. Gray returns her to her old desk and stops engaging in the previous behavior. Lee wonders if being treated like a regular secretary is all she is. As the scene continues, Lee observes Mr. Gray's tie with golfers on it and makes a comment about golfing. She notices his frustration about the tie and offers a reassuring comment. The narrative then shifts to an intimate encounter between Lee and Mr. Gray, where they establish boundaries for their interaction. Following this, Mr. Gray calls Lee into his office while someone named Mr. Marvel is waiting, creating a sense of anticipation for what will unfold next. While Gray initially seems annoyed by Lee's mistakes, it becomes evident that he too has his heart set on her, and does the unthinkable that would put many a man at shame. He spanks the monkey, leaving Lee perplexed, as this is something new but excitable for her. As a matter of fact, he hurls herself to the bathroom and double-clicks her mouse too. After addressing her self-injury tendencies and initiating a loving relationship with him, developing deep feelings for Gray, However, Gray struggles with insecurities and exhibits shame and disgust over his own desires. Eventually, after an intimate encounter in his office, he abruptly fires Lee. Simultaneously, Lee attempts a conventional relationship with Peter, even accepting his proposal after being dismissed from her job. However, while trying on her wedding gown, she leaves abruptly and confesses her love to Gray. Despite Gray's uncertainty, he tests her commitment by commanding her to stay in his chair without moving. Lee willingly complies, gaining widespread media attention during what they term the Lee Holloway hunger strike. After 3 days, Gray returns, taking Lee to his apartment where he tends to her needs. The story concludes with Lee and Gray getting married. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content. Your support means the world to us. Stay awesome, and we'll catch you in the next video. Until then, take care and keep chasing those dreams.